Why were the sons of Moses, the man who stood in the presence of God, erased from the annals of biblical glory? You've heard of Moses, the prophet who split the Red Sea, who climbed Sinai as lightning tore the sky, and God etched his law into stone. His name resounds through history, a colossus of faith whose story shapes the very soul of Scripture. But his sons, Gershom and Eliezer, they're ghosts, mere whispers in a saga that should have hailed them as heirs to a holy light. What happened? Were they unworthy, or was their silence woven into a deeper divine tapestry, a secret buried in the pages of the Bible? Let's step into this mystery and uncover the truth hidden in the shadows of Israel's journey. Imagine a desert night, the air thick with dust and the glow of a million stars. Moses stands outside his tent, his weathered face lit by the flicker of a distant fire. Below, the camp of Israel sprawls across the wilderness. 2 million souls he led out of Egypt, now restless. Their faith is fragile as the manna they gather at dawn. Beside him, Zipporah, his Midianite wife, fierce and steadfast, watches their sons. Gershom and Eliezer, playing in the sand. Gershom, meaning a stranger in a foreign land, was born in exile when Moses was a fugitive in Midian. Eleazar, my God is help, came later, a name born of gratitude for God's salvation. These boys grew up amid miracles, bread from heaven, water from stone, yet their names fade from the story. No tribes carry their bloodline, no psalms exalt their deeds. It's as if they were written out of history. Let's pause and ask a question that cuts deep. Why would the sons of the man closest to God be forgotten? The Bible doesn't shy from Moses' flaws. His temper at Meribah, where he struck the rock and lost his chance to enter Canaan. His reluctance at the burning bush where he begged God to choose another. But his sons? They're barely given a chance to fail. In Exodus 18:3-4, we meet them briefly, their names rich with meaning, tied to Moses' trials and triumphs. Yet by the time Israel reaches the promised land, they're gone, eclipsed by Aaron's sons, the Levites, who inherit the priesthood and eternal renown. Something doesn't add up. The deeper you dig, the more you sense a mystery, a silence that feels deliberate, buried in the sands of Sinai. Picture Moses in his prime. At 80, he was called from obscurity, a shepherd who'd fled Egypt after killing a man, now married to Zipporah, daughter of Jethro, a Midianite priest. This wasn't a minor detail. Zipporah was an outsider, her roots foreign in a nation where bloodlines were everything. Gershom and Eliezer carried this mixed heritage, half Israelite, half Midianite. In a culture obsessed with tribal purity, this set them apart, made them vulnerable, perhaps even inconvenient. Imagine them as boys, growing up in the shadow of their father's divine calling, watching him intercede for a rebellious people, their mixed blood a quiet mark of difference in a camp bound by covenant. Now, walk with Moses through the wilderness. He's stretched thin, mediating Israel's grumbling, relaying God's commands, his face radiant from encounters with the Almighty. His sons are there, young and impressionable, in a camp where miracles are routine, but danger lurks. Exodus 32 recounts the golden calf, when Israel turned from God, and Moses' own tribe, the Levites, rallied to him, slaying the idol worshippers. Where were Gershom and Eliezer then? Were they too young to stand with their father, or was their absence a sign of something deeper? A rift, a choice, a divine plan that sidelined them. The silence around them grows louder, like a question God himself left unanswered. But this is only the beginning. What lies ahead will challenge everything you thought you knew about Moses and the legacy he left behind. Let's step deeper into the desert, where the story of Moses' sons takes a stranger turn. The camp of Israel is a restless sea of tents lit by the glow of the pillar of fire that guides them by night. Moses, the man who spoke with God as a friend, bears the weight of a nation on his shoulders. His sons Gershom and Eliezer are growing up in this crucible of faith, their lives shaped by the miracles and madness of the Exodus. Yet the Bible offers only fleeting glimpses of them, names in passing, like stars obscured by a storm. Why were they sidelined? Was it their heritage, their father's choices, or a divine decision that left them in the shadow? Consider Zipporah, their mother. In Exodus 4:24-26, we find a bizarre moment. God seeks to kill Moses on his way to Egypt, and Zipporah saves him by circumcising their son, likely Gershom. In a hurried, bloody act of obedience, the text is cryptic, but it hints at tension. Was Moses, consumed by his mission, negligent in fulfilling God's covenant for his own family? Zipporah's quick action spared him, but the incident lingers like a scar. Her Midianite roots, her outsider status, cast a long shadow over their sons. In Numbers 12, Miriam and Aaron criticize Moses for marrying a Cushite woman, possibly Zipporah or another wife, revealing the prejudice that simmered in Israel's leadership. Gershom and Eliezer, bearing their mother's foreign blood, grew up in a nation that prized purity. Could this have marked them as unfit for prominence? Now, let's reconstruct this scene at Sinai. In Exodus 19, God descends in fire, and Moses ascends to receive the law. The people tremble, but the priesthood begins to take shape. Aaron, Moses' brother, and his sons are anointed as priests, their lineage set apart for God's service. But Moses' sons? They're absent. Leviticus 8 details the consecration of Aaron's family, a sacred moment that cements their role. Gershom and Eliezer, though Levites by descent, are nowhere in this picture. Some scholars suggest Moses was meant to be a priest king, his sons inheriting a dual legacy. Yet God chose Aaron's line instead. Why? Was it because Moses' role as mediator was too singular, too holy to share? Or did their mixed heritage make them a risk in a nation prone to division? Let's explore a hypothesis. In Deuteronomy 18:15, Moses speaks of a prophet like him, whom God will raise up. This points to a future Messiah, but it also underscores Moses' unique role. His intimacy with God, described in Exodus 33:11 as face-to-face, set him apart even from Aaron. Perhaps his sons were not meant to inherit his mantle because no one could. Their erasure might not be rejection but a reflection of Moses' unparalleled call. Yet this feels incomplete. In 1 Chronicles 23:14-17, we learned Gershom and Eliezer had descendants listed among the Levites, but they held no prominent roles. They existed, yet were overlooked. This tension between presence and absence hints at a deeper story. Imagine Gershom, now a young man, watching his father plead with God after the golden calf. The Levites, including some of his kin, take up swords to purge the camp. Does he feel the weight of his father's mission or the sting of being passed over? Picture Eliezer, named for God's help, standing at the edge of the camp. His mother's Midianite stories clashing with Israel's rigid laws. Their lives were shaped by a father who belonged to God more than to them, and a nation that saw them as strangers. But the story doesn't end here. Something unexpected lies ahead. A truth that will reframe their silence in a way you never saw coming. We're now at the heart of the wilderness, where the silence around Moses' sons grows deafening. Gershom and Eliezer, raised in the shadow of miracles, are fading from the story, their names barely clinging to the edges of Scripture. But what if their absence isn't a mistake? What if it's a deliberate thread in the divine narrative, a sacrifice woven into the fabric of Israel's covenant? Let's peel back the layers and uncover a truth that might change how you see the Bible's forgotten figures. Let's revisit the priesthood. In Numbers 3:1-4, Aaron's sons are established as priests, but two of them, Nadab and Abihu, die for offering strange fire before God. This tragedy underscores the priesthood's sanctity and its dangers. Aaron's surviving sons inherit the role, but Moses' sons are never mentioned. Why? Some ancient Jewish texts like the Midrash suggest Moses was meant to be the high priest, his sons following him. Yet God chose Aaron, perhaps because Moses' role as mediator required absolute focus. Numbers 12:7-8 describes Moses as uniquely faithful, trusted in all God's house. His sons, tied to Zipporah's foreign lineage, might have complicated this divine arrangement in a nation already prone to rebellion. Now, let's consider a twist. What if Gershom and Eliezer's erasure was not rejection, but protection. In Numbers 16, Korah, a Levite, rebels against Moses, demanding priestly rights. God's response is swift. The earth swallows Korah and his followers. The priesthood was a perilous calling, marked by divine scrutiny. By sidelining Gershom and Eliezer, God may have spared them from such judgment. Their mixed heritage, a potential source of division, could have made them targets in a nation wrestling with identity. In Exodus 2:22, Gershom's name, a stranger, reflects Moses' own alienation. Perhaps their obscurity was a shield, keeping them safe in a story where prominence often led to peril. Let's paint a scene. Imagine Moses on Mount Nebo, gazing at the promised land he'll never enter. Deuteronomy 34:5-6 tells us he dies there, and God himself buries him in an unmarked grave. Gershom and Eliezer, now grown, may have stood nearby, their father's legacy towering, yet untouchable. They're Levites, but not priests, sons of a prophet, but not prophets themselves. Their lives, spent in the background, mirror a deeper truth. Not every calling is meant for glory. In Hebrews 11:38, the faithful are described as wandering in deserts, of whom the world was not worthy. Could this describe Gershom and Eliezer? Faithful in obscurity, their silence a testament to trust in God's plan? This brings us to a lesson for today. The Bible often hides its deepest truths in the margins. Gershom and Eliezer remind us that God sees the overlooked, that faithfulness doesn't always mean fame. In a world obsessed with recognition, their story challenges us to serve without seeking the spotlight, to trust God's purpose even when it leads to silence. But there's more to uncover. A final revelation about their place in God's story that will leave you rethinking the legacy of Moses himself. We've journeyed through the wilderness, tracing the faint footprints of Gershom and Eliezer, the forgotten sons of Moses. Their silence in Scripture feels like a wound, a question left unanswered. But what if their absence is not a loss, but a sacred offering? Let's step to the edge of this mystery and find meaning in their story, a truth that speaks to us across centuries, touching the heart of faith itself. Picture Moses' final moments, alone on Mount Nebo. Deuteronomy 34:6 tells us God buried him, his grave hidden, his legacy entrusted to eternity. Gershom and Eliezer, if they were there, bore witness to a father who gave everything, his years, his strength, his very life, to God's people. Yet they inherited no crown, no priesthood, no place among Israel's heroes. Why? Let's consider one last possibility. Their silence was a reflection of Moses' own sacrifice. In Exodus 32:32, after the golden calf, Moses pleads, "If you will not forgive their sin, blot me out of your book." His life was poured out for Israel, leaving little for his sons. Their obscurity may be the cost of his calling, a quiet echo of his selflessness. Now let's connect this to a greater truth. The Bible is a story of hidden heroes. In Corinthians 1:27-28, Paul writes, God chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong, things that are not to nullify things that are. Gershom and Eliezer, with their mixed heritage and muted legacy, embody this. Their lives lived in the background point to a God who values the humble, who remembers what humanity forget. Their story isn't one of failure, but of fidelity, a reminder that God's plan often unfolds beyond human acclaim. Let's bring this home. Today, many of us feel unseen, our efforts buried in the grind of life. Gershom and Eliezer speak to that ache. They show us that God sees the quiet sacrifices, the prayers no one hears, the faithfulness no one applauds. If God buried Moses with his own hands, how much more does he cherish the lives of those who trust him in obscurity? This is the heart of their story. What's forgotten by men is remembered by God. As we close, consider this. Moses' sons weren't the only ones left in the shadows. Scripture is filled with figures whose stories wait to be uncovered. What happened to Enoch, who walked with God and was no more? What secrets lie in the days of Elijah's ascent? If this journey into the forgotten children of Moses stirred your spirit, join us as we explore more hidden truths of Scripture. Share this message with someone who needs to hear it, because the word spreads heart to heart. Let's keep seeking the stories heaven still remembers.